Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Today we are talking drones and physical security. And this is a challenge or an opportunity, I suppose, how you look at it, that I've wrestled with for several years, starting back in 2012. And my goal today and the hope is to share with you what I've learned and also walk through all of the items that you would want to consider or think about when using drones for physical security. And I'll spend the first half kind of going over that program. Second half, we'll actually have a client come speak with us. Terry Owens is here with us to share his experience and kind of get a different point of view on this from the end user's perspective. But when we're talking about drones and security, this has been something that has allowed me to put two things that I'm very passionate about together. I've been flying single piston engine airplanes since I was about 14 years old. My grandfather was an air traffic controller in the FAA, actually retired as deputy director out of the Pentagon. Many years back, started as a controller in the 1930s, but was a big influence on me, certainly in my aviation passion. The other side of that being public safety has been a part of my life for quite some time. I always wanted to be a police officer and became a security officer at age 18 and have been in the industry ever since. So for me, this has been an opportunity to put both of these things together and has been enjoyable. And I think the big thing, in talking about kind of wrestling with this challenge or this problem over the last 10, 12 years, is that the pieces are finally here and this is reality now. It's not speculative. It's not, if and when, it's here and now. So glad to share what I've got. Our Titan Protection, we are a physical security provider located, headquartered in Kansas City. We have about 600 employees total. And we have clients all over the United States. We monitor several thousand video cameras in our remote video monitoring center. And we blend that. Kind of our key, and you'll hear me talk about this a couple times, is we are the human in the loop when we talk about remote guarding and specifically when we're talking about drones here. But our bread and butter has been blending technology and people together. When we talk about physical security, we talk about technology, AI, robots, and everything else. I think we can think about that as a one or the other, and I'm a firm believer that the right recipe is a good blend of both. So we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail. And again, my hope here is just to share with you what I've learned over the years. So we'll jump right into it. And when we're talking about physical security and drones, the drone can primarily do two things. It can respond to incidents or a triggering event. That could be a radar system, a photo beam, a camera, could even be a call from a person that would trigger that drone to go and investigate further. Most of the time we're talking about that being a technology apparatus that will alert. But then the other thing it does, aside from the response piece, is preventative patrols, right? We're either patrolling, looking for suspicious activity, or we're responding to some triggering event. The other thing that I want to note there is you'll see at the last line of that AARP definition, autonomous response and patrol, is that the security happens with minimal human intervention. And I just want to highlight that because, again, the human in the loop part is an important piece. And when we start to talk about the regulatory side of this, I think there can be a misconception sometimes that the drones operate completely autonomous. They just fly around on their own. And that currently is not the case, and I think will remain to be for quite some time. But even so, there still needs to be somebody for that last mile. The drone detects something and needs a response of some sort. Then there's a human there to take care of that. The other side of that being any sort of emergency or anomaly that happens during the flight. There's a human that's available to jump in if necessary. But with that being said, the patrol routes that the drones are following are automated. The deployment can be somewhat automated as far as the launch. And so that automation piece is certainly a strong part. And again, we want to blend these things together. But the main functions being able to stream the video, record and capture data, as well as respond to triggering events. And that can be in the day or the night. So some of the things we're seeing here as far as, I'm getting there we go. Some of the advantages that we're seeing or can at least highlight certainly are response times. The drone is very good at responding quickly. Even if you have security personnel on site, it may take some time for them to mobilize or respond, but under 2-minute response times is what we're seeing, and certainly a opportunity with the drone. Hard to reach areas, that's going to be something that we'll highlight in the Shamrock case study here towards the end of this. Areas that are tough for humans to get to vehicle patrol, to run cameras to or get sights on it works very well. Also large areas, and that is certainly an area or a arena that the drone performs well in, but I would not say that it has to be a large area for a drone to be an option. And I think that sometimes in talking with customers can be a misconception that the use case is just large areas. Certainly an area or an arena that it excels at, but again, don't limit yourself to fenced lots and typical use cases that we'll talk about here on the next slide in a little bit more detail. And then we're adding the perimeter detection. Perimeter is certainly another spot that the drone shines in. For a response piece, there's some ways to get some really solid perimeter coverage and then have the drone go and respond that. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail here as well. Couple of typical applications. We are still seeing a lot of strong use cases and use cases emerging, and new things are popping up. But where we're seeing it really shine is certainly anything that has outdoor assets. When we do remote guarding, the vast majority of what we're doing are for outdoor assets, and that encompasses a lot of different verticals. Transportation, anywhere we're storing equipment, construction sites, property management, and homeowners associations have been one we've seen a lot of demand out of, and car dealerships as well. Most of the time we're talking about or competing with the on-site security officer, and that's where we're seeing, if down at the bottom of the slide, you'll see some of the success metrics. Reduction in industry, increase in response time, and then the big ones being the cost, the reduction in cost. And traditionally, security officer, and I'll show you a slide in the next where it kind of compares these two together. One of the other things I wanted to highlight on the industrial critical infrastructure, we're seeing this in construction and property management, that you also have the safety monitoring and site process progress tracking. So what we're seeing is that we're having dual uses from the drone, where maybe at night we're using it for security functions, and during the day we can use it for equipment inspections, roof inspections. We have construction partners that use drones to survey a site and figure out how much dirt do I need to grade this. Or just simple project management, being able to fly over, look in, see, did the lumber get delivered? Did this get installed correctly? So we're seeing a lot of operational benefits that also gives the value or the ability to pull from different budgets. Right now, it's not just a security function. Maybe this is something that the operations team can kick in on and also see some value. But again, the bottom there, I think, is the big one, and that's some pretty telling numbers, right? We're reducing incidents, increasing response time, and also doing that by reducing costs. And just for a cost comparison here, we're looking at over half the cost. So traditional security guard, when we talk 84 hours a week, we're typically, or at least that benchmark there is what might look like a security officer from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., 12-hour shifts overnight to guard something outdoors. $13,000 a month compared to $6,100 a month for the drone program. And that includes a mile perimeter detection. So in that example, what we're using is a radar system that creates a virtual barrier or perimeter around a property. In this case, we've got an entire mile that we're using to secure. So that's all included, including the installation, and we'll kind of break this down in a little bit more detail here down the road. But that's including everything, and that's the perimeter detection. So somebody breaches that radar, the drone is flying to investigate to see what happens. And then we've also included in that example 3 preventative patrols. So maybe we are during the day flying around during operating hours, looking for suspicious activity, flying preventatively, looking for those types of things, and getting some visibility on the property. So that again, on the left side there, when you're looking at traditional security guards, that may be at 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., where for half the cost with the drone program, we're turning that now into a 24-hour security measure. So very compelling from a use case, and I think that ROI, and when I talked about the competition being the on-site security officer, very compelling type there. Now, the other thing to think about is that last mile and that response. We'll talk about that a little bit down the road, but again, I think the best prescription here is the blending of these things together and the different layers of security. So when I talked earlier about kind of wrestling with this for 10 years or so, really what it boiled down to were we needed 2 things to make this a reality. And these are the 2 things that we're seeing come together currently that make this an exciting time to look at drones specifically for security. Those 2 things being, we needed a viable path to beyond visual line of sight. Right now, the FAA in drone flight commercially is governed by Part 107. That requires that you have a licensed 107 drone pilot on the ground, visually in contact with that drone while it's flying and while it's operating. For us to use this as a security measure, we needed to remove the person from the ground, put them in an operating center to achieve the ROI we're looking at. The other side of the equation was a docking station. We need, if the person is removed from the physical scene, we need some means to be able to launch the drone, to land it, and then to charge it. Nobody was really making docking stations until recently, because without beyond visual line of sight, they were really not needed. If there was a pilot on the ground, they could launch it, they could swap the battery out, really wasn't needed. So now that we're seeing a viable pathway to beyond visual line of sight, we're seeing a proliferation of docking stations, which is then making this a reality for use in physical security. So the good news is these 2 things are coming together and making this a reality. So with those pieces coming together, you may be thinking about using drones as physical security or having a drone program. And so now I kind of want to take a deeper dive into the different parts of a program and what you will want to consider when thinking about using drones for physical security. The number one thing that probably pops up or certainly comes to mind is compliance and regulatory. And I think our audience probably, is a mix of folks that have some background in drones and some that have a background in security. For those who are maybe not so up to speed on the current regulations, the FAA currently governs commercial drone flight through Part 107. We touched on that a bit, where you have a licensed pilot on the ground flying it. You can currently get a waiver for that to be able to fly beyond visual line of sight. The waiver process, you go site by site. There's paperwork. They want to know, and commercially, we come at it from, we want to scale this, we want to grow it, we want to make money. The FAA looks at this from a safety standpoint. How do they ensure that operations are safe, that the public is safe, that these things are used in a good manner? So what they want to see part of the waiver process is what is your conceptual operations? How are you showing and convincing them that it's safe for you to fly these drones beyond visual line of sight? There is currently, we are expecting anytime soon that they come out with Part 108. We're assuming that's what it's going to be called, but they should come out shortly with a notice of proposed rulemaking for Part 108, which kind of shows us the framework for what they're expecting for beyond visual line of sight. That is to kind of scale this to where instead of getting a waiver to fly beyond visual line of sight, there are very strict and clear guidelines on how to do that and what to do. It seems like they are going to hold companies and certify companies as Part 108 as opposed to individual pilots, which is kind of how Part 107 is governed currently. But again, we are waiting to kind of see what that framework turns into. And when we say they're going to release the notice of proposed rulemaking, that's basically them just putting out the draft of what they think it will be, allows for public comment. And then there'll be about an 18 to 24 month process before that actually becomes law. So in the meantime, we have to rely on the waiver process. We recently received and believe we're the first security company to receive a nationwide beyond visual line of sight waiver, which allows us to scale this without the individual waiver process, which is time consuming, it costs money, it's just very challenging to scale that. So we went about that from a national BVLOS waiver, and we're successful in getting that, which has really helped us to scale the operation. Beyond the regulatory component, you've then got the pilot training and licensing. The Part 107, and I think, knowing that we're kind of in between, Part 107, when they started it, kind of took what they knew from manned aviation and put in and did the best they can with it, but it's not all that relevant. If any of you have been Part 107 pilots or have gone through the test, there's a lot of METARs, and certainly you need to know airspace and different types of things. But we're really excited to kind of see what Part 108 brings and how we get some clarity to remote piloting. But right now, the real focus is making sure that pilots are trained on abnormal operations. What happens if we lose connection to a drone? What happens if it loses GPS signal? What happens if there's somebody around the dock when it needs to land, or you get up in the air and the wind won't allow you to land, or all these sorts of different things are certainly, and our waiver governs a lot too of things we're mandated or must train and track and license. So definitely a big part of the program is to think about a training regiment, but then also how are we keeping the records and, knowing when recurrent training needs to happen. That goes along with fleet management. When we're talking about adding several drones or even a singular drone, there are certain requirements that you must meet. And that may be, swapping propellers after so many hours, or batteries after so many cycle changes. Airframes need replaced after so many hours. So just having a robust means of tracking that is certainly an important piece, just to know and stay current on aircraft maintenance and what needs to be done with that. The last bullet point there, privacy, that was a much bigger one than I think I thought of initially. And that came top of mind when we started getting insurance policies and talking to insurance carriers. I thought their big concern was going to be the drone falling out of the sky or hitting somebody or that type of thing. Their main concern is how are we storing images? How are we training and auditing operators to make sure that as we're flying around the property, we're keeping the cameras, where they're supposed to be and not zooming into the neighbor's window, or, what are we capturing? What type of data as the drone is flying around? So that's a big piece to think about. We've seen some really unique things out in the drone space. A couple manufacturers. One actually has one that you draw a geofence around the property. As the drone's flying around, you get a very clear image of anything inside that geofence. Anything outside of it is blurred out. And that's a really good hygiene piece, I think, that just really kind of takes that discussion off the table. But all of this is very exciting and new, and we learn a lot from operating these things and flying them. But I think when we start talking about Skynet and having drones and robots flying around and everything else, there can be that hesitancy from the public. And I'm a big believer that that's something we want to get out in front of and kind of, acknowledge and call out. And I think there's a big responsibility for those of us that are kind of blazing the trail, that we set the table right and we get these things right, because there are some big safety and privacy concerns that go along with operating these things. Beyond the compliance piece, then you will need a place to fly the drones, a remote operations center. This for us, since we were already doing remote guarding and operating a video monitoring center, was a smaller lift for us than it would be if we were trying to spin something up all over, from start on our own. One of the big considerations, and one I did not see in the ARC recommendations for BVLOS, was any kind of talk about redundant internet or power backups. And I think that can become important. What happens if you have a drone or several drones in the air and you lose power, you lose connection? Thinking through the redundancies, the contingency plans, Our monitoring center is UL listed. We're also 5 Diamond certified. So we have a couple of independent bodies that one set standards, but then 2 will audit and make sure that we are living up to those standards. So certainly something to consider. Also hiring, shift coverage. You know, we've seen a lot of companies that want to maybe try and bite this off on their own, and then they have our Part 107 pilot. Well, what happens when they leave, or they're sick, or they're not there, or what are those backup plans from a staffing perspective? And then again, those pilots need to be trained. Part of our waiver, even though we're flying beyond visual line of sight, we still have everybody that's operating the drone is Part 107 certified. Currently, too, and this is something to consider, is that the FAA currently allows 1 remote pilot to 1 drone. So that is something to consider when you're thinking about staffing and how many drones are you operating, what can happen during that piece. It seems pretty clear that, and the FAA loves a crawl, walk, run approach. So, when we're talking about 1 pilot to 1 drone, the next step will be 1 to many, 1 pilot to many drones. We really don't have a ton of insight into what that will be initially of how many drones 1 pilot can operate simultaneously. And then ultimately we get to none to many, which is the drone is flying its patrol route autonomously. It is doing its own thing. Again, there will still be a need for a human in the loop for what happens if there's an emergency, abnormal procedures, and what happens if the drone detects something that's suspicious or criminal. There still needs to be somebody on the other end there that is prepared to take action and knows what to do. Very similar to our camera monitoring business. We are the eyes behind the camera. The human in the loop is the function that we're fulfilling. And then again, beyond in the operations center, thinking about privacy, record keeping, software is a big one. This is, if you're flying multiple drones, what software are we flying out? That single pane of glass is something that comes up in many discussions, but how are we integrating the radar perimeter system to trigger and tell us the drone needs to go up and operate? And how do we put all this stuff together? How do we tell the operators, okay, you're flying around, you see something suspicious, what do you do? Do you do an audio intervention where you come through a speaker and come with a very detailed message? You in the red shirt, leave immediately, or police will be dispatched. Do you call the client? Do you call the police? So the software piece of this is a big one that ties in all of these different components from many different angles. Our waiver requires that we have available to the pilots the site assessment that we are required to do for each location, a copy of the waiver. There's a lot of compliance issues, checklists that we want to be able to show this pilot did a risk assessment at the beginning of his shift to talk about how much sleep did he get. All of the different pieces that come together that show that we are safe to fly. We want to document that. We want to systematize that and have that in an easy to use, but then also easy to go back to down the road if we need to show compliance. The FAA comes in and wants to see our proof of that. We want to have that in a very robust system. And then just computer and phone system management, something to think about just as part of the entire ecosystem of an operating center. There's many components that go into that. Challenges and limitations. So this, I just kind of wanted to highlight a couple of things to think about, or some gaps that could exist when we're talking about drones. Wind resistance being a big one. I know when I first started looking at docking stations, I had the perception of how tough can it be? It's just a box that opens up and, my cell phone charges wirelessly, so how hard can this be? Precision landing is the challenge with the docking stations, and, getting something to land in the exact spot you need it that lines up where it's going to charge. And I highlight this in the weather discussion because I'll see a lot of drone manufacturers will highlight weather capabilities. We can fly in 40-mile-an-hour winds, but then you may note to land in the docking station, it can only be 25 miles an hour. Well, your endurance for that is 25 miles an hour. If it's 40-mile-an-hour winds, but you can only land in 25, you need to earmark that as that's your operating procedure. And temperatures, certainly something to think of, and just weather in general. The drones, most can fly in light rain and snow. depending on, DJI Dock 3 just came out, and they have some de-ice capabilities on the propeller. Ice gets on the propeller, you lose lift, you don't fly. So it's certainly weather is something that comes into play when we're thinking about these things. And down there at the bottom, you'll see layers of security and kind of some additional consideration. That layers of security is important when we're talking about some of the weather limitations. We just need to be eyes wide open that there will be times, I think they're fewer and far between, but there will be times when the drone's not going to be able to fly, and we need to be eyes wide open to that. That's either we're comfortable with the gap and we know that we're going to not have coverage in a specific, or that mission is not going to be carried out in those conditions, or we have a backup plan to augment that with foot patrols or other pieces of technology that fill that gap. So I just really am trying to highlight this as something to think about and consider and build into the overall security plan when you're thinking about these types of things. Endurance factors for how long the drones can fly, that certainly varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. We're now seeing those times upwards of 55 minutes as new equipment is coming out. Mostly not an issue. Most of the missions we're flying, we're seeing about 10 minutes or, around that area. That really may come into consideration when you think about how often you want to fly. If the drone needs to charge for 20 minutes and it's flying for 10, just kind of thinking about how often it can fly could really be impactful if maybe we are flying a mission, we see something suspicious, dispatch the security of the police, and we keep the drone in the air for overwatch. Something that we want to keep an eye on is how long can it stay up in the air, and what do we do when it needs to charge, and we may lose eyes on that. We've had clients have discussions about maybe we have 2 drones in docking stations. That gives us the ability to have one in the air at all times while one is on the ground. So there's just some different things around that, just something to consider when you're building a program or considering it. The docking stations, most of the time we're seeing those either, we'll install them on a concrete pad, put a fence around it. A lot of times we're seeing rooftop installments where they're just out of the way and protected. But getting power and internet to them is certainly a consideration. And then an emergency landing zone is another one. Every site we have must have an emergency landing zone. If the dock becomes disabled, if there's people around it for some reason, you need to get that drone on the ground. You need to have an alternate landing zone to be able to do that. NDAA compliance, that's a big discussion and could be a whole other webinar. So I won't take a ton of time to go through the intricacies of that, but it is certainly something to consider. Those security professionals out there, this is nothing new. We've been through this with Chinese camera manufacturers and NDAA and all of that for a while, but it's certainly top of mind when we're talking about drones. There are, Chinese drones, DJI, that makes a good drone, but there are, it's owned by the Chinese government, and there's some security concerns. I will say that most of the time, and I do think that there are areas where there should be concern. When we're talking about critical infrastructure, it's a non-starter. There's already even bans in place where you're not allowed to use non-NDAA compliant drones in those areas, and so you often are just, you start there as far as not even considering. But then you have other customers that may not have the sensitivity needs, that look at the price point, the capabilities, may understand that, hey, yes, worst case scenario, does the Chinese government have the ability to look in at the data that we're getting? Do they have the ability to down the drone if they choose to? That's certainly consideration, but I think looking at the application and the threat picture, our car dealer may not care as much about that aspect of it as our natural gas company or critical infrastructure partner. So it's definitely a big discussion, but I think it's more site specific when you start really drilling down to which type of drone do you want or need to use. Most have thermal capabilities. The options are somewhat similar. But the price point and some of the capabilities and the rate at which some of these companies are innovating and just mass producing some of these things are quite different. But there's a lot of discussion around that piece. So just something to highlight and something to consider when you're talking about using it. When we do use DJI drones, we put some hardware appliances in between the dock and the network. We are also typically putting it on its own network, whether that be Starlink, 5G cellular, so that we're mitigating those issues as much as we can. That really then leaves the software updates as the prime exposure in that scenario. That's another thing that we vet through some cybersecurity professionals and just keep an eye on before applying software updates. So there's a lot of people who feel very strongly about this subject. I'm probably one that sits in the middle and sees both sides. And I really look at this in something just that we are cognizant of and sensitive to on an individual site-by-site basis, and just kind of guiding through what the best options, what the good, what the bad is, and making the best decision from there. But certainly a big discussion, big conversation to have, and certainly that's going on in the drone community now. Lots of legislation, lots of discussion around it. Additional considerations, we talked about this, the layers of security. This is one piece of a bigger picture. Sometimes it may be the only piece, right? You get one application and it may be a construction site, or it may be an equipment yard, transportation, where the drone is the single piece of security. And that becomes important again when you start talking about some of the limitations in weathers. Are we okay with the gap that's created when the drone can't fly? Do we need to put a means in place to fill that, or are we just comfortable with that? And again, maybe also thinking about it as a layer of many security measures. I think that is kind of what you'll see when we start talking about the Shamrock use case, is this is one piece of a bigger puzzle. And I think the threat picture, the industry, all of these things play into how big of a piece is the drone. Is it the main piece of equipment, or is it one piece of many? And again, I think that's a site-by-site type of discussion. The last mile there, again, I want to highlight, whether this be drones or remote video guarding, there is a last mile to consider there. The drone is very good at detecting. I still think there's a response piece out of that. If you've ever had a drone fly over you, it kind of sounds like a hornet's nest. There is a deterrent factor, I think, and we saw that earlier in some of the stats that we're seeing a 30-40% reduction in incidents. I do think it's a preventative measure. The response piece is something to think through. Do we have or need a guard company that can respond to a verified event? Do we call the police? Do we do an audio intervention? Again, at Titan, we're big proponents of blending all of these things together. We want the technology to do 90% of the heavy lifting, the detection, sorting through the different pieces of information to raise that needle and say, hey, I've got something here, and then let a human in the loop evaluate that, determine if action is needed, and then carry it on from there. So just want to paint the picture that this is, one piece of a bigger puzzle, and that would be what I encourage everybody to do when thinking about using these for physical security, is just look at the program as a whole and be eyes wide open to the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then privacy, again, I keep hammering that, but something to think of and to certainly consider when thinking about a drone program. Next, we are talking about, there's a couple options here. You can do this yourself. You can outsource to a provider like Titan. And there's two kind of ways to look at this: an in-house program or outsourcing what we call drone as a service. There on the left, I just kind of wanted to highlight or detail, here are the different pieces to consider. Some rough costs to that, the FAA waiver, that can be plus or minus depending on how you go about it. And a lot of these things are all, different costs. The personnel, you look there at $350,000, that really accounts for the payroll of having somebody in a monitoring center 168 hours a week or 24/7. But that's not accounting for training, for what turnover costs may be. Building a monitoring center, that's not even accounting for a number on that side. But there is some as a service options, and that's how we go to market with this. Is the customer pays one monthly fee that covers everything. That covers the piloting, the equipment, the installation, the record keeping, the waivers, the insurance, all the complexities. And I think that's what I have found as I've wrestled with this over the years is as you really start to peel back the layers, there's a lot of things that go into a program like this. And not to say that you can't do it yourself. but just some difference, and again, kind of being eyes wide open into what you're getting yourself into. So I just kind of wanted to detail some costs there. To highlight some of the differences between outsourcing this or doing this in-house. Okay, so that's just a rough summation there of those costs from the previous slide. When you add all that up, you're well over $1 million for the in-house solution. And then kind of using that $6,100 a month comparison we did to the on-site security officer a few slides back, just showing the cost difference between the outsource model and the in-house model. So roughly overall, what we're seeing is if you are outsourcing this piece, you're reducing your headaches, you're, shifting the liability to another partner, you're reducing your costs. I think too, when people start thinking about the in-house versus outsourced, something may come to mind. They say, well, I want to have access to the data, or I want to be able to have the video streams, access to the footage, or I want the video to be in my video management platform. All of those things are still possible. So we still give our clients the ability to see the footage. As we get into the Shamrock discussion, the officers that are on the campus have the ability to follow along with the patrols and see, it's flying over an area that's tough to see. They can look at that and determine, do they need to leave their, front desk post to go investigate that, or they're still able to capture that. So we're fulfilling the human in the loop on the back end, handling all the complexities, the regulations, the costs, but the customer still getting the benefit of the data and that type of thing. The other thing that may come up sometimes is people say, well, my site is sensitive, or we can't have those folks outside of an organization, on our network or looking at our stuff. We have some pretty high level clients that we do VPNs through. Maybe we put our own internet connection or its own network on. I can talk at length about kind of some of our hiring practices and background checks and different things like that I think would be more robust than what you may see in an in-house program. Not to say that there is not a use case or a scenario where an in-house program doesn't make sense. Just want to highlight the benefits of an outsourced model. You get all the data, all the information without the cost, headaches, or liability. So something to consider when you're thinking about using drones and for physical security. So with that, that's kind of a high-level overview of what we have, of what's involved with using drones for physical security. And so I kind of want to take that now and put this into the real world and talk about an actual use case with a customer. And so I have invited Terry Owens here to join us. Terry, thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Sorry you had to sit there and listen to that whole ordeal, but I appreciate you jumping on and being patient. I just, as an overview of your career, Terry, you spent many years at the police department. You retired from Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. Detective, sergeant. I know in your background you've planned chief's parades and worked homicides and done kind of everything, but then got heavily involved in ASIS, got your CPP credentials, jumped over to the corporate side. Now you are director of security for Shamrock. Shamrock is a global transportation company, a couple thousand employees, 8 campuses around the country, lots going on at Shamrock. Appreciate you coming on, and anything I missed in your background or anything you wanted to highlight there?
No, I think you covered everything, and it's great to be here. I mean, there's so many use cases for what you're talking about. It's really great to see the cutting edge and be on that cutting edge of what's going on in the industry.
Appreciate that. No, and I think, when we talked about, we have some use cases or some customers where the drone may be the primary piece of equipment from a security perspective. I think when we're talking about the Shamrock ecosystem, this is one layer of many that we have implemented into the ecosystem. There's a lot going on here. I mean, people and all sorts of different things. It's a pretty mature security program. Am I off on any of that?
No, it's that security in depth. It's that layering security. If something goes down, you always have a backup for it. You always have a plan in place to cover. It just gives you a different perspective. There's so many different different avenues that you can take. For example, we had a storm last night and we have a lot of damage in the Kansas City area. Well, this is just a new use case that I hadn't even thought about, that we can go look at it in icy conditions without having to send, physical people out there. There's all sorts of new things that are coming up every single week of ideas that we hadn't even conceived in the past.
Right. No, great point. And I think, we're seeing that as well, as you get it there and then you start seeing different ways to use it operationally, that just these things have amazing sensors on them, amazing capabilities to zoom, to, capture data, put models together, all sorts of different stuff, that it's just kind of exciting to see it emerge.
Yeah, it has come so far in the last couple years. If we were to go back 2 years ago, I wish we could have used this for a couple different things. We were working on a building project. We had a large crane. Kids were climbing up the crane and would have been able to deploy a drone up to see, okay, did somebody actually make it up there? Or how far up did they go? A couple years ago, I wish this would have been where it is today.
Right. No, yeah, that's great. Well, so just to give an overview of the use case here, we've got a large campus. I've got a kind of an overhead shot, and what we'll go to here towards the end is some actual video examples of what we're seeing on the property. But basically, we've got a big area, and there's some spots that are tough to address, right? We've got some homeless camps. We've got parking lots, drainage ditch. We've got a big lake that can be, bring its own issues, premise liability stuff and invited nuisances and those types of things. How has this, or where have you seen this kind of shine, or what gaps have you seen it kind of fill?
There's a couple things. So the other day, Ryan and I were talking about this, that we have a large lake. It's been really cold. We have really icy conditions. It's difficult to get cameras out there because the runs could be 800-900 feet. You're talking about huge expenses to put cameras out in those areas. Well, we also can't send our contract guard service out there because of, it's icy conditions. They could slip and fall. We have premise liability issues. Well, then lo and behold, school was out. We had some curious kids that wanted to come out and made it, a couple, probably 5 feet out onto our lake, and trying to use drones to help us curb that a little bit. Because the one facet that I really look at is, if somebody sees a drone, they think somebody's watching them.
Right.
And that's truly, and my experience has been, is that's what stops people, is the fear of being caught.
Yes.
And if somebody believes somebody is watching them, it makes it that much more. They see it, they can hear it. It's
right.
it's that physical reaction to send that nervous system going, oh my gosh, somebody's watching me. How do I need to get out of here? And then we have some really hard areas to get to, a drainage ditch that or not drainage, I guess it's like it's just a large storm drain. We really can't send people down, but we've ended up with some graffiti issues. We have a wooded area where we've had some homeless people decide to set up camps. And I think the infrared type of use case for that, especially at night, because they may not be there during the day.
Right.
And we can see, okay, was somebody here at night? I mean, there's so many different use cases. And like I said, we keep coming up with them. Every week there's something new. Every time I talk to you to say, hey, did you think about this?
Right.
This is a whole new use case for it.
Yeah, it's funny, the kids on the pond thing, you're talking about it, and then right after, there they are. And that too can be dangerous because, like here in Kansas City, we were just talking about it. It snowed here this morning, but it was 67 degrees or 70 degrees on Monday. So I think you get somebody out on that lake that thinks it's frozen as it's thawing out. Obviously, that's not a great situation. So this has kind of expanded the eyes of the security team, and also allows them to get eyes in difficult parts of the property while they remain at their post. A lot of the security officers may be at the front with an access control piece, and so keeping them there unless they need to, or we've got different people, kind of out and about. But being able to just expand that coverage, I think, has been has been helpful in this scenario. When we started talking about putting this in, and I think you covered a lot of this stuff, is we're having the drone patrol the property for these trouble areas, also just kind of normal patrols like we would as a physical security element, just being visible, looking for suspicious activity that's out there. Highlighted a couple things. You know, one, the expense of putting cameras in some of these locations you already touched on. One of the things that was eye-opening to me was increased visual coverage by 60%. You have hundreds of cameras here. That's a compelling number because I think it just shows how daunting coverage is from a camera perspective of, I think there's lots of people out there that look at different areas of their property and know, I wish I had a camera here, or, you know, this issue here, or, so I think just that expanded footprint again is something that certainly helps out the overall security posture.
Well, not just that. I mean, cameras are an expense themselves. I mean, you know, there are major camera brands. The cheapest camera they sell, just the camera itself, is $350, not mentioning, you know, how much it costs to run the lines to get there. If you're using PoE, do you have to use extenders, all these different avenues. But something that I really take into consideration is, so like our contract security, they're managing the access control for people that are coming in and out. I mean, there's hundreds of employees coming in and out. There's packages being delivered. There's all these different facets, people visiting buildings, people coming in, you know, for to meet people for lunch, all these different avenues that this just allows it one more piece where, you know, if we need to go back and look at what's changed, you know, we end up with situations where somebody's car gets damaged in the parking lot. Well, we can go back and look at the footage and say, okay, was it, you know, did it look like this earlier? Well, let's go check out the drone footage.
Right.
I mean, there's different avenues that, I can come up with an endless, well, probably not endless, but it would be a rather long list of use cases that this overall, when you add it into your security layers, it just really increases it. And I mean, it truly is. It will be a game changer in the security industry.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you know, just kind of highlight the property here. And we've got a couple of clips from patrol missions that we've got around the property. But just to give those out there looking, here's kind of an overview of the campus. So a lot going on here, a lot of challenges. Down to the bottom right at the other end of that lake, that's a challenging area to look and see from a camera perspective. You know, your options are basically mount a camera on the buildings here and hope to get through some of those trees or some of those long distances. The drainage ditch over here in the bottom left corner, that's the area you were talking about that has some homeless, some graffiti issues. There's a dumpster back here, and we'll show this, a couple clips on this, but just kind of wanted to give a general overview of the property of, you know, this is a fairly large area, but there's lots of different areas to be considerate of, from we're talking premise liability to auto burglaries to there's just a lot going on here. So with that, I'll just show a couple clips here. This is a couple clips from actual missions that are flying around the drone, and Terry, feel free to jump in here with any commentary, but this is, and you're going to see it kind of switch between thermal and color camera. That's the lake there. And so kind of as it's flying along, and that field area too is also pretty pitch black. So, I mean, the thermal camera and kind of getting some coverage in those areas, especially at night, seems to be a crucial part of the equation. Well,
and that's the thing, is this is only half of the campus. You know, right. This is 35 acres. The campus is over 70 acres. When you start factoring in, you know, personnel, what it would cost personnel to cover all this, if you had somebody out walking this, I mean, 10x.
Right.
And so when you're looking, like right now, we're looking at the lake.
This the drainage.
Oh, sorry, drainage ditch. So the last one was the lake. So we're coming up to the drainage ditch. You know, the thing I really think is great is the infrared, where you can see if somebody's been walking up. Mm-hmm. And you pointed out earlier that you can actually see footsteps.
Yeah, we'll see that towards one of the, well, and vehicles too. If you got a car that pulls up, you'll actually see on the thermal, the hood is white, and you know that car just got here, or, you know, or another car that you look at and it's cold, you know, hey, that's been sitting here. This is another pain point, this dumpster area. This is an area of concern. I know, the neighbors across the street, people just pull up and throw stuff in the dumpster. It's a challenge to get a camera there. This has been another one that I know we highlight and keep an eye on when we're flying around. Yeah,
the dumpster, everyone thinks that trash is, hey, what's the big deal, about going and throwing trash in dumpsters? Well, for us, it's thousands of dollars.
Right.
And it's thousands of dollars a week, every week.
To get rid of all of that trash, but then also when the Shamrock folks need to go and use the dumpster and it's already filled up, then where does that trash? So it's a headache. There's no doubt. Parking lots being another one, and I know this one, and we didn't get a great clip of the portion to the left here, but you'll see this switch to thermal. But the area on the left where we're panning over towards is an area where some homeless will set up camps. That's been another area. It's very challenging to get a security officer in there for a terrain purposes and just kind of walking out. It's a super simple use case for the drone to be able to fly over, especially with the thermal capability, and determine whether there's people in that area.
Well, and also, what's the tolerance of whether you're going to send somebody in there? What is your tolerance if if somebody breaks their leg, if somebody ends up encountering somebody in there, if we can use this to our advantage to be able to tell, okay, this has been going on, that is, if we can even tell somebody's been in there, that will eliminate a huge even facet of it, especially from a liability standpoint. I know that, hey, we contract with a service to do that, but it doesn't eliminate the human factor that you have relationships.
Right.
I have relationships with everybody who works on the Shamrock account. We don't want anybody to get hurt for unnecessary reasons. And so we can use this as just an additional tool to keep our people safe. Not only the Shamrock employees, but the people who contract here and the people who are working on our campus in security.
Absolutely. Yeah, that last scene there, I just wanted to show that you can actually see footprints through that field on that thermal image there, which again, that field is completely black and darked out at night, so that thermal capability of being able to fly over that. We have got a couple other, this is just some footage from another customer that I think really kind of highlights some of the thermal capability, shows what people looks like as they're walking around, and then also shows some zoom capabilities. The camera quality in these things, the zoom capabilities, the thermal, they're pretty incredible. If you haven't been flying drones or not up to speed on what they can do, it's pretty incredible. You can see their license plates and all sorts of different stuff.